My name is Sam Reynolds. I was born in Kansas City, Kansas in 1937. My father's name was Claude Reynolds, and my mother's name was Lavina Morrison.
And tell me a little bit about it. Your dad?
My father was an attorney and practicing attorney, and my mother was a housewife, and she was an artist by just hobby or whatever, and she was very good at it. I went to school in Kansas City, Kansas, public school there, and all the way through high school. I ended up in Arkansas looking for a place to retire, really. I had traveled a lot in Arkansas on a recreational basis, but we finally found Beaver Lake and liked it as a site to build a home. So,
Tell me about your business. What was your business and how did you come to Arkansas with your business?
I was a CPA, and the travel in Arkansas was somewhat limited in my profession, but I worked mostly in Southwest Missouri and in other states. I was interested in Arkansas because it was a very pretty site, and so we just decided. We traveled around the country and a lot of other places, different lakes, to see whether we liked them or not. But this one was very close and was, well, the first thing we did was get ready to build a house on the site. We bought a property and then a site, and then we got everything arranged with contractors and built a house for us to retire in. And it was a beautiful site, still is. I built the house 20 years ago, or 23 years ago, and I'm still happy with it. We're getting enormous growth in the area. It's almost scary.
Talk about the growth on Beaver Lake. What has it been like?
Well, you see a lot more boats, and at times it can get very crowded on the lake. But the good thing about it is in the fall, or what I call the off seasons, you can sometimes have the whole lake to yourself.
What do you know about the history of Garfield area? What have you noticed since you've been here? What do you remember over the years?
Well, at first I didn't know anything about the history of Garfield, but I'm kind of always been interested in history, and so I was curious about the area when I first moved or built a house and moved here. And one of the things that I think was kind of interesting with that, in that regard, when we built our dock, we kept stumbling over this rock formation, or wasn't a formation, it's a foundation really, where we were going to build our dock. And I always wondered what it was, because it was rectangular and a nice foundation, but it was about a foot underwater. And so I actually started asking people that I encountered if they knew what it was, and eventually they told me what it was, and it was a post office, the foundation of the post office for Glade, Arkansas, which existed before the lake was there, and then it got flooded so they moved the building, and that really kind of got me started in the whole idea.
So tell me, what is Glade? What was Glade? What was it like?
Well, it was a community of, I don't know, maybe 300 different families, farm families, and they didn't live, right next to each other all the time. They were scattered out along the river, along the White River, and they were kind of subsistence farmers, I would say. They raised what they needed, and they didn't have to go get very many things. It was very difficult because of the roads for them to go anywhere and get, any products or anything. So, but they did work together as entertainment and church and all those kinds of things. If they had to find something that they needed, they would go into Rogers usually, because the roads were better going to Rogers than anywhere else, but it was not easy because they didn't have, they had horses, they could ride horses into town, but they didn't have vehicles, and they didn't have good roads. It was a big, if you wanted to go into town and buy something at the store, the whole family would go in a wagon and spend the whole day going in and coming back.
So was it sort of a social event as much as?
Yeah, everything that, they used various things like that as social events to just, their farms were far enough apart that they didn't see each other every day, so we kept asking them, trying to find out what that foundation was, and we encountered, I encountered one of the lady who's now president of the association she was a native that grew up next door to that post office. She and her brothers had 2 brothers, and they lived in a home right next door to the post office. And so she, of course, knew exactly what I was talking about. And come to find out from in talking about that, we found out that the post office building had been moved from the lake shore, or it was actually moved before the lake was filled in completely, and they had moved it to Pea Ridge, and it was they had moved it about 17 miles away because they were not going to be able to farm there anymore, and so they moved that building to Pea Ridge to use as a farm building or in another farm where they had bought property. But I just found it when it got started that way, trying to find out what it was about. I was just really excited because I like to find out what's going on in the area. I'm just curious about everything. It was news to me that anybody could live the way that people did. I mean, and not need other stuff. At least now, that was actually back before I was here, but they did, and so a lot of my wanting to investigate it, wanted to see how you do that.
How did they do it?
Well, they, like I say, they did go into town occasionally, and there was a road that ran along beside the White River, and that was just a dirt road. But and at first they were going in there with horses, and and wagons. And later on, as people began to get cars, of course they had other ways to go, but it still was difficult to go into Rogers or another town around there. But as I understand it, and I think this is true, they they would buy things at first, maybe like they'd buy some coffee at one time, you know, and then they found out what they liked it, and so they figured out how to grow it. And it's amazing the number of crops that they were. I mean, they grew tobacco, and they grew various kinds of feed grains because they had cattle that they fed and had milk cows, and they would after they'd grown the cattle to sufficient size, they'd butcher them, and they had of course they had no electricity out there, and they had no indoor plumbing. They had springs that occasionally there where they could use the spring to cool food for them and so forth. But they're very self-sufficient people. You just don't find people that, you know, if they needed something, they figured out a way to do it. Well, they had a school which was built out there, and it was a public school. That wasn't until the late 20s, and the school was just a one-room schoolhouse, and they used the schoolhouse a lot for social purposes and you know, just church. The schoolhouse was, and it's still there, that schoolhouse, and it's in good shape. And they had pretty regular social events either in the schoolhouse or outside it. And then, so we developed a lot of information about what took off there, because they, as you may know, these country newspapers had correspondents, you know, and so they had a Glade correspondent that wrote in, and a lot of it was not all that interesting to us, but they did it, and you know, I'd say that Harry and Margaret have been home for a week to visit and so forth, their children and things like that, and you picked up the names of it was quite we figured out how many, you know, different families there were, that it was difficult. You wouldn't necessarily know all those, but because they all were included as Glade.
Was that in the Rogers Daily News or what paper?
Yeah, yeah, it was in the Rogers Daily News, and I had encountered that kind of a thing before up in North Missouri, where they had correspondents in the paper that told you what was going on. So that's why we decided to look in the Rogers paper. I wouldn't have thought about the Rogers paper being and I still don't know for sure that it was really delivered to any great extent out there in the somewhere. I don't know how the people in Glade found out what was in the Rogers paper, but this post office was located there and close to the school, which the school's still there. And so when we moved, I mean when they moved the buildings because of the lake, they had to, the government bought the land, and so a lot of buildings and houses and so forth were going to be flooded. And so the people that owned them the government told them, you can move any building is there or do anything you want with it, but you gotta worry, if you don't move it, we're gonna tear it down. And so they moved this building that had been the Glade store and post office. They moved that building over to P Ridge because it was going to get flooded, and it was just fairly good buildings, pretty stout building. So they moved it over there on land that a gentleman named Liss Williams, he moved his house up on higher ground, and he moved the blacksmith shop that was on up to higher ground, and to instead of letting the government tear it down. So he and his children, his wife, lived there in that house after they moved it up the hill, and they made it all work, which was kind of amazing, that because they were establishing themselves on a farm over at P Ridge at the same time, and it kind of that worked out that the Glade farm sort of won. They ended up staying there. He didn't sell the farm in P Ridge, but he just lived in Glade. And by that time, they had good enough roads and so forth to get back and forth, so he could go back and forth. I think it was 17 miles over there, but their farming seemed to change. Of course it would with the improved transportation, and so he was instead of trying to raise everything, they bought more stuff, and the family essentially stayed in the Glade area for a long time. Even when they left, they didn't. I mean, when they just moved into P Ridge or into Rogers or something. You asked for a picture, so I brought a funny picture. It's May. But when I was 8 years old, in Kansas City, and some person drags that little airplane thing around and takes pictures of it. My mother always thought that was wonderful. But anyway,
back then, was it kind of a big deal to have a picture taken?
Yeah. We had pictures taken once or twice a year, and we actually went to a photographer, and he took them with the family and stuff. But one other thing that we haven't covered is this organization called the Glade Community Historical Society. It kind of grew out of the fact that some of us didn't know enough as much as we'd like to know about Glade. Of course, Patricia Heck, who is president of the organization today, knew a lot about it because she grew up there from birth up till she went to college. And so there were three of us that wanted to develop more information about that and record it. So there was a lady named Anita Freevert, and Pat Heck and myself decided to form this historical society and to retain information about Glade. But the main purpose of it in the beginning was to raise the money to move the post office building 17 miles from Pea Ridge down to Glade. And so we were able to get some land donated, a small amount of land to put that building on, and they gave us the land right across the street from the school, so it was an ideal location.
So you moved it back near to where it was before it was moved to Pea Ridge to.
Yeah. It was probably within a quarter of a mile of where it was originally. And that was a good morale booster for the society too, to get that set up and moved. And we had it's a pretty good sized building, and we had to take the roof off of it, and then you could move it. Well, we had a house mover take it, and they could move it right down the middle of the road, but not any less. And so, and a lot of people didn't think that they could move it that way. But one thing that was reassuring to us was that the Williamses' father had moved it with a lot cruder stuff than we had to do with. And when he took it over to Pea Ridge, and he was just taking it over there because he wanted to use it, and it had all the fixtures, kind of homemade type fixtures for the post office inside it, and a lot of accumulated stuff that they tended to believe that anything that was still usable, they weren't going to get rid of it even if they didn't need it. And so it was full of that kind of stuff, which was really a good deal for us for our historical society. But and since then we've continued to have four quarterly meetings a year where we have programs that help understand what was going on back then, and we also use it for entertainment that's appropriate for those people of that age group. And
what other communities were lost when the lake was filled up? Do you know of others besides Glade?
Yeah, there were. Let's see if I can think of them. There were several of those small communities that just disappeared. I mean, people don't even know where they were really now. And sometimes we were able to find where the location was by just talking to enough people, and pretty soon you say, well, it was over here. And some of those schools, because every one of those had a school at that, when they got into the schooling. So, and so those schools would usually fall down or somebody do something with it. But as long as Glade was fortunate and the schools lasted there, and it was kind of a for sure marker about where it is. But the area was pretty much, there were schools sites all over the place if you can find them, and they were all one room schools, and the teacher was hired and brought in there. I think originally they were sometimes paid by the teachers were paid by the parents. Would go together and come together with some money to pay a teacher, but later on they all became part of the Rogers school system. They were just known as rural schools out there, but after about the sixth grade, they generally went to another school, like Garfield. Most of the kids at Glade School went to Garfield after they graduated in sixth grade.
Was Garfield bigger than it is now back in the day?
Oh yes, I'm not an expert on it, but they definitely were. They had a hotel and a bank, and had a couple of stores in Garfield, and there was there were several different businesses along the railroad tracks that went right through Garfield, and they packed apples and they shipped them off, and they did the same with strawberries. And the railroad made it possible for Garfield to kind of have a way to ship agricultural goods. Garfield was across the river from Van Winkle Mill, which was a large wood for a lumber mill, and so all the buildings that they had in Garfield were built from stuff there, as well as other ways. But Benton County is a very, very fast growing town now, and at one time it was definitely small town. And in Bentonville's, of course, where the Walmart operation began, and basically in Bentonville, and then there were many different businesses in the poultry industry and that type of stuff, and some manufacturing areas that came in, and so the area, Northwest Arkansas, grew and was able to sustain itself. And so my favorite thing about Benton County is that you have all the things and the conveniences you need in Benton County, but it's very attractive. And I think they've done an excellent job of developing it so far by, not spoiling the beauty and quaintness, small townish. The future of Garfield is they're going to have to develop a sewer system for the city, or they're not going to survive too long as far as businesses. You can't do very large businesses in a town with no sewer system, and that's not cheap or easy to do. But I think they have the right idea about it if they can get it done.